met my wife, obviously that picture was taken before we adopted the twins. As you can tell by looking at my wife, I was one of those, you know, you sometimes see those guys, you see a guy with a girl and you're like, how did that guy get that girl? Well, I'm one of those guys, as you can now see from the picture.
They call
there.
that marrying up.
I've married up in a big, big way. My wife was actually a psychology major in college, and I'm still convinced she initially started dating me as part of a case study, and somehow got sucked in and got more than she bargained for. But as I've shared with you guys many times, what I launched late last year and really kind of flipped it into high gear this year is Family Upward, marriage, parent, and family life coaching. By the way, Doug Simons helped me come up with that logo, if you think the logo looks good. And the reason why I did that was a number of reasons. Number one, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not a licensed psychological counselor or anything like that. What I do have is over 10 years of experience, about 11 years of experience in the full-time ministry, in which I counseled and worked with people from all walks of life, many of which were parents, counseled oftentimes married couples, did pre-marriage counseling on many occasions, and worked with married couples. And then after I had children, of course, family just became that much more of a passion for me. Even with my writing, a lot of my writing that I've done and the writing that I've actually won awards for have been writing on the topics of marriage and parenting with Atlanta Parent Magazine and some other publications like that. After I got out of the full-time ministry for personal reasons that I just didn't want my faith and my paycheck so closely tied together anymore, back in 2005, I got out. But I've always looked for a way, how can I get back into using the things I feel like I'm good at? Working with people, helping people, public speaking. The feedback I've gotten is that I do pretty well as a public speaker. I think I actually do a lot better if you give me 45 minutes or an hour than if you give me 1 minute or a 7-minute presentation that I have to constantly worry about the time and things like that. But that's kind of a little bit of a background on why I started Family Upward. I guess the culminating thing was last year I met a gentleman named John Roseman. Has anyone heard of John Roseman? He's not syndicated in the AJC, but he's syndicated nationwide in many newspapers. He's one of the most highly published experts on parenting in the nation, on national talk shows all the time, that sort of thing. He and I hit it off, became very good friends. He said, Kendra, why don't you come on board? I'm really wanting to train a group of family life coaches and parenting coaches in particular who can kind of carry on for me after I retire in a few years. And it's kind of exciting because John's also brought me on board to write his next book. He doesn't have time to write his own books anymore, so I'll actually be writing his next book starting next month. So I'll be going to Charlotte to spend some time with him, where he lives and things like that. So that's kind of how it all came about. And sometimes people ask, you know, what's the difference between, say, coaching and counseling? Well, like I said, I don't get into psychoanalyzing people. It's not therapy. Number one, I'm not qualified to do it. Number two, in the vast majority of marriage issues, parenting issues, it's really not necessary. And it can actually be counterproductive. Because, for instance, you might be working with a situation where you've got a behavior problem with a child that really needs to be dealt with, and the child's behavior needs to be dealt with, and it doesn't require a deep psychological analysis. And if you start getting into that, what's going to happen is you're going to end up turning the child, who maybe is an offender in this situation, into a victim. And then what happens is parents start paralyzing themselves. They don't do anything because they get so wrapped up trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why is he this way? Why is she this way? That they don't just say, okay, what's the behavior that needs to change? How do we deal with it? And then get from A to B. And in the same way with a marriage, a lot of times, one of the things that I help couples with and talk to couples about a lot of times in their marriages, first of all, I help them see that most time their situation isn't that unusual. It's amazing how much relief and how much hope people get just from realizing they're not the lone basket case in a sea of people who seem to have it together. You know, you start talking openly, you start talking more in depth, they start to realize, okay, other people have these kind of issues too. The second thing I try to help them focus on is, what can you control as an individual? Because a lot of marriage problems escalate because a wife gets so focused on what her husband's doing, or a husband gets so focused on what his wife's doing. Why can't she change this? Why can't he understand this? And there's a place for that. You need to communicate how you feel. But what I try to help couples see is, look, at the end of the day, you can't control what your spouse does. And you can't control how your spouse responds. Even when you do everything right, your spouse still might not respond the way you want them to. Same way with parenting. Even if you do everything right, even if you are Ozzie and Harriet, okay, even if you are the perfect parent, you cannot control your child's behavior. And so a lot of times what parents want, or even what couples want, is they want a method. Okay, Kindred, show us the method. If we do A, B, C, we'll get result D. Tell us what to do, we'll plug it in, it'll work, life will be great. I don't spend a lot of time talking about methods, although I do offer practicals. Okay? But what I spend most of my time helping people understand up front, first of all, is having the proper mindset and understanding the proper principles they need to focus on. Because the method, you can use a lot of different methods. What's important is that you have the right mindset and you're focused on the right things. So that's kind of the approach I use. My philosophy is I come from a biblically based perspective and a common sense traditional perspective. 1 minute. Common sense traditional perspective. And what I mean by that is, if you go back 60, 70 years to the time when, say, my grandparents were parenting, they weren't having to put up with a lot of the disciplinary issues, behavioral issues. I don't think anyone could have, if you'd asked someone what ADHD was, they'd have thought it was something to kill bugs with. You know, those sorts of things. Marriages, the divorce rate wasn't anywhere near what it was. Common sense tells me they were doing something right. And so what I advocate is getting back to a lot of the traditional methods that actually worked many years ago. I'll just close out by saying this. Ways you can help me. Like, I'm trying to get in front of a lot of the same kind of groups Joe is, obviously with a different topic, but also, you know, churches, PTA, civic organizations, HOAs, those lovely clubhouses in your neighborhood you're paying for with the HOA dues. I'd love to come in and do a presentation there. If you know someone you can give me that you can say, hey, I know you're on the board, there's this guy who wants to come in and do this. Would it be okay if he called you? That would be a great referral for me. If anyone's interested, I'm speaking at the Marietta Business Association breakfast on May 18th. You can talk to Mark about details of that. I'm also speaking at Northview Church of Christ in Roswell on June 10th, Friday night, June 10th. That will be a seminar, and that topic will be Christ-empowered parenting, embracing God's perfect plan for imperfect parents. Talk to me if you'd like to come to that. Thank you.